Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Lunch and Learn. It's nice to see so many of you here. If you want to put in the group chat where you're listening from, it'd be nice to hear how far we're reaching. In terms of the recording will be available after the session. And then also there is the opportunity to write into the chat function. So if you do have any questions throughout, we'll keep a note of those. And then at the end, we'll be able to answer that if we have time. So once again, thank you for joining us on this Lunch and Learn about managing residential and day trips. I'm Carrie, I'm a behaviour analyst, and I am one of the outreach consultants for the Outreach and Training Department. So in terms of what we're covering today, we'll be discussing the benefits and challenges of going on trips. We'll discuss some research around there, the preparation for trips, and then also risk assessments, and then furthermore, person-centered planning. So what are the benefits? So the following are kind of outlined here in this lovely colourful slide, but the benefits include enriching experiences. So we want to give our autistic students valuable experiences, getting them to go to different areas, whether that's in the UK or outside of the UK, getting them to experience things that they might not have the opportunity to. So for example, if families aren't able to go abroad, or if they aren't able to go to certain facilities, then this is something that schools can provide for our students. The second one is around skill building and independence. So school trips not only foster the skills that you're working on within the classroom, but they ensure that they're generalized so that they go beyond the learning environment, beyond the on-school site. And then furthermore, we've got cultural exposure. So one of the benefits is being able to maybe eat foods that they might not be eating, maybe go to different sites, or maybe listen to different languages that they won't otherwise be exposed to if they remained in school. Furthermore, we've got building confidence. So again, being outside of a school situation, outside of the classroom environment, away from kind of routines and typical structures, we are enhancing the confidence in our students. And it might also be a case of engaging harder to motivate learners. So as all of us, we have different ways of learning. So it might be that these learners actually benefit from being outside of the classroom, and they actually might be more focused and more concentrated in what they're learning if it wasn't in the four walls. Social development, there's opportunity as well for peers to interact with one another. It might be that school trips enable different year groups to interact. They might be exposed to different peers that they don't otherwise see if they're in different form groups, for example, and also effective learning. So we want to make sure skills learnt within the classroom are generalized. So what do they learn, whether it's a kind of history lesson or whether it's a geography lesson, how can they then expand on that learning? And then lifelong memories. We want to obviously create memories for our learners, ensuring that they've got different experiences, maybe things that they want to report back to when it comes to their families and caregivers. And then relationship building, not only with one another, amongst peers, but also with you as staff members, maybe LSAs, maybe TAs. So it might be that going on a residential trip, I think it's quite focused. It might be 5 days out of the week. You're obviously building on those relationships and maybe problem solving together on things that they otherwise wouldn't encounter. Okay, so what could be the challenges? So research does highlight that, you know, there is maybe less of a willingness to go on school day trips and residential day trips. For some of our learners, it might mean that a trip equates to the loss of routine and structure. So many of you might be able to resonate that some of your learners actually don't like going on school trips. The thought of going on a school trip means that they then don't have access to maybe their 9 a.m. lesson, or it might mean that they can't go to the playground at 10:15 as they usually do. So for autistic individuals, this can be a big barrier. School and day trips, residential day trips might also mean that there are physical needs to consider, which can obviously be a barrier. So it might be that your learners require more support. For example, it might be the use of certain aids, maybe the use of wheelchairs, something that makes it more accessible that maybe the outside world, outside of the school site, can't always cater for. Other than that, we've also got health and safety, including risk assessments. So you know your cohort well, you know what risks they might encounter, whether that's stranger danger or their own personal risk assessments. So these are some of the barriers that come into play. And then staff resourcing. I think amongst many schools, we might be a little bit understaffed at times, and therefore planning of a residential and school day trip might mean picking from different cohorts, maybe different staff resources, maybe even asking the head teacher to come along, people that don't always have that direct contact with your learners, and then making sure it's a successful trip. So these are some of the barriers if we're thinking about staff resourcing and also timetables. Individualization, when we say a residential or a school day trip, how do we know it's going to cater for everyone there? So we might have one student who really favors being physical, going outside, maybe participating in sport activities, whereas on the other end, we might have a learner who would prefer to maybe walk around at a museum, take in more information. So again, it's a case of individualization, but some of the strategies or recommendations that we'll go into in the next slide will hopefully outline how we can kind of combat that. Okay, our next slide is about researching. So how do we know that the places that we're going to are suitable? So we may have a number of destinations and locations that we frequently go to. So within our local area, a lot of the schools will go in and around Southwest London, but we're definitely venturing further than that for Parkhouse School and Tramhouse School. But it's important to look at what connections you can build, not just in terms of day trips, but also within your local community. So maybe you're making more frequent visits to the local supermarket. Maybe you're making frequent trips to the park as part of a sensory diet. So it's important to look at the local offer. So there is the local offer that you can just put on your search engine, and that might highlight what things are available, what services can be available for your school to visit. You might want to ask the venues whether they cater for learners with SEND. They may say they do, but then actually you find that when you visit these locations that they actually don't. So it's important to ask for their risk assessments, their maps, all the resources that would be relevant, but then also to conduct your own risk assessment. So making sure you schedule a visit ahead of your actual trip and maybe going with a colleague so that you can all bounce ideas together, maybe look at certain locations that might be considered hotspots, that might be considered areas that your child or young person can go to if they are feeling a bit of sensory overwhelm. And you might want to take that as an opportunity to get pictures or even videos. So for example, if you were to visit a zoo, you might want to take these pictures so that when you do return back to your classrooms, you can then say, actually, this is where we're going, this is what it looks like. Again, utilizing the internet, you might want to just go onto YouTube, searching in that local facility, and then having your students watch the videos of what to expect. Remember that you are the experts about the cohorts you support, so you know your learners' needs. If you are aware that there is a certain learner who might require a breakout space, then ensuring that that is maybe readily available. It might not be something that is signposted from the venue, but actually if you can identify that and there can be some accommodations made, then that will be ideal. Okay. Other things that you may or may not be aware of is just the sunflower lanyard. So this indicates to members of the public that the student or child, young person that you're supporting has additional needs, and therefore to make sure they are being patient with your student, make sure that they understand that you, again, are the experts and you are aware of the additional needs that might need to be kind of supported in the public. And then also the use of a radar key. So that enables you to access disabled toilets, again, should your cohort need that on the spot. So in terms of next steps, we're talking about preparation, all the things that we've talked about before, we're making sure we research, but other things that you can do is to discuss the trip with your students beforehand. So at Beyond Autism, we really rely upon person-centered planning. So we want the students to be at the heart of any decision making, whether that's transitions into different schools or that might be transitions to a school trip or making a trip themselves. So it may be that the students get to vote. So you might have trips already in your kind of you might be already aware of certain trips that you want them to kind of choose from. And then if you've already risk assessed this, they can choose and maybe put a vote in. Giving them an idea of what to expect. So you might plan lessons around it. Again, we want to link the learning back from the classroom all the way to kind of generalization outside. So maybe planning a session around it. Again, it might be related to actual subjects, such as going to the science museum and you're learning about chemistry and biology, or it could be as simple as getting them to practice some of the skills that would be needed on, let's say, more physical residential. So learning to abseil, maybe confidence building, increasing their communication of how to ask others for support if they need help for doing a Caribbean, for example. Again, I said you can include videos of the route that they might walk or what they might see, and asking the venues in advance. There might be resource packs that can be available. So you may have a range of different learners. Some might be able to access this resource, but if you do have it in advance, you can adapt that within the school so that it's tailored for each individual that goes on the trip. There's some factors to consider. So journey time. Looking at the travel to and from the venue. Again, it might be the case that some places are quite limited for where you are, but looking at what is a reasonable journey time for your learners. Transport, thinking about the seating plan. If you are sharing a transport, do you have certain learners that should be nearer to the window, nearer to the toilet? Is it the case that these learners have access to what we call reinforcement whilst on the journey? Is it that some learners can travel via public transport versus some that are in more individualized taxis, for example? It might be that we also need snacks, including things where one learner might be allergic to peanuts, so communicating that in advance. So these are some things to consider. And then sensory needs, again, if you are traveling, are there some learners that really struggle with being on the buses? They really struggle with being on a coach, or they struggle with being on a train where obviously they have to navigate platforms or go through different tunnels and have many passengers on the commute. Okay, then we've also got specific pupil needs. So we have to consider mobility. Again, we know the accessibility within our schools. We know whether classrooms are easily accessible. We know how to move tables around to ensure that learners can access the classroom well. But this isn't always the case in the natural environment. So we need to look at ramps. We need to look at whether there is learners that actually fatigue quite easily. And then also looking at the sensory input. So is it that for this particular trip, you may have to order more noise cancelling headphones, for example, ear defenders, or you might require more sensory tools to support with transition, so either fidget toys. Is it that you need to actually have their visuals that are more portable? So nothing where there is Velcroed visuals on a door, but actually you're bringing that with them. In addition to that, in our orange box, we've got medical. So our medical needs might include seizures, things like additional allergies, EpiPens for that, and hunger and thirst. So I know we do communicate to parents about what is needed, but ensuring that you've got the water and food as necessary. Okay, so some strategies of support, looking at those boxes from the previous slide, is looking at the accessibility of the venue. Are facilities within walking distance? Do you actually require 2-to-1 staffing or 1-to-1 staffing, or even more than 2-to-1 staffing? Are there ramps and lifts? In terms of medication, so in advance, we would make sure we have the correct medication. Within our schools, we always have a spare medication and then one that is supplied at home, so that we always have that readily available. We need to make sure that all staff are aware of the administration and dosage. And if the school trip or the residential trip actually falls during the time at which the child is meant to have that medication, then making sure that staff are given those handovers, they've signed a care plan, but they also have maybe alarms and stopwatches to remind them. And then if we are carrying medication, ensuring that maybe it's a first aider that's holding all the medication. Again, there might be a barrier there because groups tend to kind of drift off in different directions. Okay. Sensory sensitivities, I did already mention the ear defenders and the fidget toys, but it could be that you have to upskill your staff even more on understanding that maybe during certain times they might have to have hand squeezes or regulation techniques. So a lot of it might be co-regulation techniques, and others might be things that your child already knows how to manage independently. Other than that, there might be movement breaks that you want to incorporate within your trip. And you might also want to inform parents of using weather appropriate clothing. So if we think about some of our learners, if we are doing more rainy or seasonal type activities, we know that clothing can be a bit aversive if they have struggles with touch and tactile stimuli. In terms of food, informing parents in advance about food requirements. I've definitely gone on many trips where there isn't a microwave readily available. So actually a lot of our students who are only used to having hot food or only used to having food that's in a kind of heated canister, they then struggle, which then might mean you have to pack more food than usual, or you might want to upskill your child and young person by actually giving them money, either from the school budget, or again asking parents if they want to work on that skill around money management, where they go into the facilities on the venue and they actually can search for what food they might want to order and eat from there. When it comes to food, also making sure there is a dedicated space just for your school to eat. And if it isn't just for you, then understanding the risk assessments there. I spoke about communication aids. So we always know that behaviors that challenge are a form of communication. So there may be some kind of communication breakdown. We don't want it to be the case that practitioners are only using communication aids within the school and they then don't get used anywhere else. So actually, if you are preparing for these trips in advance, you might want to incorporate symbols of the trip. So if you are going to the zoo, you might want to have different pictures of animals that they might encounter. Or if you're going, for example, to a trampoline park, you might want to have pictures of the socks that they have to then change into, maybe the water that they have to then request for if they are tiring and getting hot. So these are things to consider in terms of communication aids. We don't want them to be sitting in the back of student backpacks and not being used at all, because this is where the likelihood of behaviors that challenge may occur on your trips. Tiredness and fatigue. School trips can be anxiety provoking. So for some, it might be quite exciting and really motivating to get out of the school classroom. But others, it can be really, really daunting and they might not engage with the trip at all. So consider what your backup plan will be if the trip isn't something they want to be involved in. It might be that, again, you have a dedicated space where certain students may want to wait. And again, you have to enrich that student with something to do. It doesn't have to be related to the trip. It might be that they take their schoolwork outside. But again, we are just building up those skills to hopefully fully integrate them on these trips. Okay, so this is just an example of some of the risk assessments we may have. Feel free to take a screenshot, or again, the recording will be available, but this is our processes within our school services. So we conduct the risk assessment at least 2 weeks before. If we have bigger trips, then of course we do it far more in advance. Historically, we have gone abroad within our service, and we have done residential trips, but more recently, a lot of daily trips and school trips, end of term trips. So on the day, we want to double check. This is what staff members will be signing, for example. So checklist to make sure all adults are informed of the procedures for the day. They know which snacks and lunch are needed. They're holding medication if necessary. Everyone's got the appropriate reply slips. I think that's a barrier for many schools, getting the reply slip in advance, but making sure that not only does the reply slip have the emergency contact details, but again, that the contact details of the people supervising the trip are readily available for all staff in case one person goes missing with a child. First aid kits available, and then any additional information for pupils. So again, person-centered planning. That child should also be made aware of what the procedures look like. If they are cognitively able to understand, then obviously it's important that that's communicated in advance. This again is an example. It might be as simple as putting onto the risk assessments the exact route you're taking. I think now that we're all quite tech savvy, staff members will be carrying their phones to have Google Maps available. So some of our risk assessments, again, will detail a few of the things that I've already mentioned in the slides. So if there are seizures, in this particular row, we've said that there may be an injury from actually falling from the seizure. There might be emotional distress for others witnessing the seizure, but also the person experiencing it. So in terms of our normal measures, which is the fourth column, it will say that first aiders should be readily available. So you'll look at your ratios, ensuring that everybody attending is clued up on that care plan. And it doesn't have to be a first aider administering that medication, as long as you are able to understand the dosage and the exact procedures there. Moving things out of the way for this particular risk, especially if there is a risk of further injury. And then students that suffer from seizures are additional measures within Beyond Autism. We usually carry an extra pillow just in case. So I'll move on from that one. Other things might be noted. So traffic, that is a risk, of course. If your child isn't as aware of their road safety skills, if they haven't yet acquired those skills, then it might be something that you want to do within your school. So upskilling them for some of those prerequisites, understanding left and right, understanding even just to stop on command, for example, when that is an instruction that is delivered, being able to kind of hold an adult's hands. So these are things that can be worked on. Other risks that we've noted here on this particular risk assessment is crowded areas and open spaces that might lead to behaviours that challenge. So going into behaviours that challenge, we at Beyond Autism acknowledge that there are four functions of behaviour. The four are escape, avoidance, tangible, attention, and sensory. So based on this, we usually then will formulate an intervention that will support to hopefully reduce the likelihood of those behaviours that challenge. So when we are on trips, we can see that behaviours that challenge may occur because it is a different environment for not only staff members, but also for students. So we make sure we actively use things like public cards to inform everyone of we're aware of how to manage maybe these behaviors. If they are concerned, we give the information so that they can contact us if they've witnessed something that they're unsure of. And again, it's a card that is handed out to members of the public, and it supports you managing that behavior that challenges, so that you then can have all your attention focused on supporting your child or young person. So in terms of what I was mentioning earlier, the 4 functions might look like the following. So on a school trip, we're just specifically talking about this context. So it might be that the child engages in behaviors that challenge because they want to escape from stimuli or avoid stimuli that is unpreferred. So if we think about a cinema trip, it might be that they don't want to be in the dark screen, they're not aware of what's coming up next, and they therefore don't want to be in that environment. So what we could use as a function-based intervention might be a break card, or kind of a card that signals to us that they don't want to be here. And again, it replaces that behavior, that challenge, with something more functional for them, so that they can either use the card or they can communicate vocally and say go or finish. In terms of attention, it might be that behaviors that challenge occur because that person wants to initiate attention from either a peer. Maybe they like being their peer laughing at their jokes. Maybe they want to get the attention of staff members. Maybe they call out on the bus and then they get kind of acknowledgement from members of the public. So these might be things that you see. And again, we're trying to teach functional skills, so we will try to teach some form of communication. So it might be that you increase your attention for that learner during really pro-social times, really acknowledging when they are gaining attention in an appropriate way, or you might have free time scheduled where they have time with you or the favored person or the favored peer outside of those times as well. The third function is tangible. So they might want to access a preferred item, activity, or location. So for example, the zoo is something that they might favor. They really want to get into the penguin, I don't know what they call them, penguin sanctuary maybe, and they attempt to go climb overboard to access that. So what we need to do is have maybe access to different things that are more favorable, which what we would say is compete with that reinforcing item or location or animal. So we might have them carry a bag of reinforcing items. Again, this will be really individualized. It might not, this is very generalized, but it may or may not work. And then finally, sensory. So they may engage in a behavior because it actually feels quite good internally and it's quite regulating. So if you're seeing that dysregulation is starting to occur, then we need to look at venue adaptation. So really sourcing those quiet zones or those rooms in which the child or young person can go to. It might be that they have to wear specific clothing. So rather than them wearing the grippy socks at a trampoline park, they might have the go ahead to just use their normal socks. So those might be things that you want to speak to venues in advance about. So other things that we may support or may use when we are doing any residential trips or day trips is pupil debrief. So when it comes to behaviors that challenge, we might encounter crisis. So using visuals to support both for the pupil, but maybe for the staff member as well, or any other peers that were involved. We'd also explain what happened in the moment or give them that opportunity to tell us what happened, again, if their communication method allows. We would also ask pupils how they're feeling or how we may be feeling. So it's important that we also communicate that too. And then we'd also direct them to emotional regulation toolkits. Again, if they've identified something that is anxiety provoking for them, then we can direct them to their emotional toolkit or direct them to a safe adult who would be on that school trip with them. Okay, I'm aware that we have maybe 2 minutes to go. So just as a general summary, every learner is entitled to full inclusion in school trips. So this also includes residential trips. We acknowledge that planning trips can be quite busy and it can be stressful for those leading on them. So it's important that we're always asking learners how they feel, especially if the trip requires them to spend some time away from home. And then involve parents in the planning as much as possible. So if you are doing residential trips, I know we asked in advance what the nighttime routine looks like for many of our students. And, you know, we were informed that a lot of our autistic students do get up very early in the morning. So this is where some staff were readily available and the shift was taken there. Okay. I will end on the fact that we use person-centered planning. So our PCP, if you do want to give that a search on our website, is readily available for download. It should be used as a tool throughout the person's life, but it can be used for big transitions, such as moving schools, but also for things like a trip. So in these sections, it outlines what a good day looks like for that child or young person and how we can support them further. So I'll end it there. I don't know if we do have time for any questions. I'll have a look at the chat, but do take a QR of, do take a picture of the QR code. If there's anything you want to reach out to us about, we can have a free consultation with you. In terms of our next Lunch and Learn, that will be with Bobby Stone, who is our Senior Behaviour Analyst, and she will be going through emotional regulation next month. So do sign up for that one. It's a good subject. Let me just see if there's anything in the chat. I will answer this afterwards if that's okay. We'll get back to you if you leave your email. I think our admin can sort that out. So thank you everyone for listening. It was lovely to see so many of you, and do join the next one. Thank you very much.